on a field day for the heat down there. 1,000 people in the street singing songs and they carrying signs, mostly saying hooray for our side. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. When people speak in their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop the children. What's that sound? Everybody look, it's going down.
Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. I'd like to introduce you to my guests, who are fellow Bernie delegates Bobbi Jo Chavarria and Mike Wilso. How you doing, guys?
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, everybody.
This is probably the most spontaneous, quickest show I've ever put together, and it really came, Bobbi, from your post of Bernie Sanders' economic answers to COVID-19. And I said, this doesn't have any of the medical answers. And then you said, this was just a part. And then you talked about more what was in his whole speech that he made. And then you said, you were taking his ideas and you were going around to local decision makers, local officials, and trying to implement them. And I thought that was so genius, because we know that the most effective action can happen at the local level. And then Mike, you piped in with how you were going around to retirees and shut-ins, to, knocking on their doors, keeping your distance, of course, but seeing how you could be of help. And it kind of reminded me of Occupy Sandy, because I was in the Occupy movement. I didn't go to New York and participate in that, but I remember following it very closely. And I remember everybody was saying that they were so much more effective than even FEMA or the Red Cross. Because FEMA and the Red Cross were just taking big, packages of water or big packages of diapers and just dumping them willy-nilly on the street. Whereas the Occupy Sandy people were going around building by building, neighborhood by neighborhood, knocking on people's doors, seeing what they needed. And then all the neighbors would pitch in and help provide those things. So it was a lot more efficient. It was a lot more customized. They felt like they were having some control over this and not just being recipients of charity. And it taught them how to be political and what the government was doing, what they weren't doing, what they needed to do to get the government to do stuff. And I just was so enamored with that effort that I thought, well, gee, maybe we could do that. I mean, there are some challenges, obviously, because you don't really want to get too close to people. So what kind of precautions do we have to take? Berners are sidelined right now. They can't be canvassing. They're really told all that we can do is phone bank. Bernie sometimes seems to be giving up the ghost. Sometimes he seems more like he wants to fight. I'm never sure. Maybe we'll know more tomorrow night. But in any case, Mike, let's start with you, because you were saying the movement is it's not me, it's us.
Sure, Lauren, and thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be with you, with everybody here. I think, we've gotten used to this idea of politics as being a realm that's occupied by these folks who live in an ivory tower, and they have all these decisions to make on our behalf, and we hope that they are on our behalf and not somebody else's. But participation is really what politics is about, and that is what this movement has meant to me from the beginning. And it's stated perfectly in Not Me, Us. And, Bernie calls us out and says, are you ready to fight for somebody you don't even know? Well, let's go out and talk to our neighbors and show them that we're willing to take care of them at a time when they may be in need. Not wait until, we find out that somebody's in a dire situation. Let's go and knock on somebody's door if they're reluctant or scared to come out and talk to people or have nobody to reach out to locally. Let's let them know that we're available, that we're close by if they need a hand, if they need somebody to do a grocery run for them or get them some supplies, or just to talk to them to feel, that things are not falling apart.
Tell us what the results of your going around your neighborhood was.
Well, I had really good results. I mean, there's some doors where I never get an answer, and today I actually got one. That was encouraging. And of course, I told people, well, don't open your door, if you want to just crack open your window and we can talk through the screen. and to be prudent and show them that we do care and that we understand what the risks are. Yes, people are actually receptive. They say, okay, well, you can leave me your card or leave a phone number. And after trying to talk to a few folks and getting turned away on some of them, what I resorted to was writing down on some cards and taping them either on the handrail outside or on their door, and just basically saying hi. A handwritten note that says, "Hi, I'm your neighbor, and I live right down the street, and we've never spoken to each other probably, or we see each other and we wave from our cars, but things are different now, and if we need to know that we have each other's support, and I want you to know that I'm here for you. This is my phone number. Let me know if there's something I can do for you."
Oh, that's really awesome. And Bobbi, why don't you talk about what you've been doing?
Bernie laid out exactly what the country needed to hear and the path moving forward, and it really moved me to think about what it would look like if we were in charge. And that was actually a directive during the campaign, was to act as if we were in the White House, and how would we treat community, and how would we paint the vision of what can be done when people come together. And so I took his call to action of like, hey, I'm a California state delegate. I'm a county central committee member. I know on a first name basis my local legislators. Perhaps they're not getting all the information they need, and so maybe I'll reach out to them and say, hey, here's some ideas of what can be done. And so that's what I did. But the one item in particular for me was information to our community, because we know when people are scared, and Marianne Williamson, I'm quoting her from a long time ago at a conference I went to, where we were talking about war, and the Iraq war and Afghanistan war. But she said, when we create desperate situations, that leaves desperate people, and desperate people do desperate things. And so what we have to do in the face of this really huge crisis is calm folks down, is let them know that we are here for each other. And that was part of Bernie's call to action. And I, in particular, know that there's a whole bunch of community organizers like myself who were plugged into the Bernie Sanders campaign, who know how to pick up the phone and talk to strangers and check in and say, hey, what are the issues that matter to you? And it wouldn't be that much different than Bernie's call to action for a help center, resources that folks can reach out to. And our county and hospitals and even retail stores, grocery stores, are going to be overwhelmed with random questions. And so what better way than neighbors reaching out to neighbors and making that happen? And there's funding to ensure that all of these out of work community organizers, because campaigning has completely stopped, can actually make a living, but also serve the community the way that we have always wanted to, and help supplement and augment the government programs that are going on, but have traditionally always been out of touch with what's happening street by street, city by city, on the day-to-day basis. And that's a policy that can be implemented right now as we're taking measures. And so I've been reaching out to my legislators to get some support on that idea.
Yes, well, it's interesting because somebody posted a petition in change.org. And folks, I always tell people, do not use change.org. It is a for-profit petition site. They run petitions for corporations and AstroTurf groups. I remember in particular, I first learned about this. They ran a petition for Michelle Rhee's Students First, which was this charter school, front group. So I like to use MoveOn's petition site, because you can actually then email your petition signers, and you can email them by congressional district and possibly even as local as city council district. There was this petition on change.org to tell the mayor of Pasadena to have a moratorium on evictions during this coronavirus crisis. And I want to post some links into the chat afterwards, not to scare people unnecessarily, but to scare them necessarily, because this is really bad, folks. And anyone who is saying that this is not going to be really bad is living on another planet, or they're listening to too much Donald Trump. The fact of the matter is, France just closed all shops and restaurants. Well, not shops, restaurants, museums, movies, every public place. I think the only places that are open are shops and pharmacies. So this is beyond the point of being able to contain it. We now have to mitigate it. And to do that is obviously this social distancing. So everything needs to be closed. And quite frankly, I think it really would have been amazing if Bernie Sanders had called for the primaries to either be postponed or turned into vote by mail only primaries. You guys know what we had in California, especially in Los Angeles County, with those 2 to 4 hour lines where people were in that kind of proximity to each other, and then touching those ballot marking devices, which I'm sure there's nobody's cleaning them off after each use, you know, is just a recipe for disaster. And I kind of was hoping that he would have called for something like that. Couple of the states already did postpone their primaries, but I could see why he wouldn't. He's very anxious to win, obviously. You know, and then people are saying, well, not that many people have died. It's not just a matter of dying. It's a matter of being sick and not having enough ICUs and not having enough ventilators and not having enough respirators and enough medical practitioners to handle the people that are going to be sick. Anyway, I don't want to make this whole show about the coronavirus. I want to get back to, what do you think this kind of mutual aid would look like? I'll tell you, I had a conversation with Jack Rabbit Pollock, who I've known since Occupy. We used to have these inter-Occupy calls using the Maestro call system with people from occupations all over the entire country. It was really beautiful. We made decisions by consensus. I don't know if you guys were part of Occupy, but you would have twinkle fingers. Like if you liked something, you went like this. And if you didn't like something, you know, so people weren't,
Yep.
you could, like using the Maestro call system, if you liked the idea, you would press 1 and they would sort of take a temperature of everybody on the call. If you didn't like it, you could press 2. You could also go into breakout rooms. So if you were doing by region, the Northeast, the Southwest. So Jack Rabbit knows how to run those calls. And he said, oh, we're actually having a call about that tomorrow. We talked about how this could be done really when people are afraid to go face to face. And I said, well, let's just take my neighborhood. I live on a street that has 2, which is a dead end. And then there's 2 streets off of my street, which are dead ends. And it's a total of 65 homes. I would be willing to make a flyer, put it on the doors of all these homes and say, let's have a phone call. Let's see who needs stuff, who's willing to provide stuff, because we shouldn't all be making multiple trips to the supermarket. I posted a CNN video from earlier this evening.
Professional runner Rebecca Mara witnessed that firsthand this week, and she tweeted this about her trip to the store. As I was walking in, I heard a woman yell to me from her car. I walked over and found an elderly woman and her husband. She cracked her window open a bit more and explained to me nearly in tears that they were afraid to go in the store, afraid to get sick as they are in their 80s, and hear that the novel coronavirus is affecting older people disproportionately and that they don't have family around to help them out. Through the crack in the window, she handed me a $100 bill and a grocery list and asked if I would be willing to buy her groceries. Well, this story went viral. It was shared nearly 90,000 times in just 2 days. And this is Rebecca Mara who wrote that post. Rebecca, it's just amazing because I think you're going to inspire a lot of people with this to think about how they can help. But just take us through this moment and how this played out and what went through your mind as you learned this.
Yeah, it was just a normal day at the grocery store. As I was walking into the grocery, I hear from, the corner of my eye, I see a woman kind of waving out of her car and saying, hey, you. So I walked on over and I was so surprised. She, said to me that she was afraid to go in the grocery store. And I said, what's the problem? She said, well, I'm afraid, the first case of coronavirus in Bend just happened yesterday. And I'm nervous to go in the store. My husband and I are worried because it's disproportionately affecting older people. Would you be willing to buy my groceries for me? And without a thought, she cracked the window open a little bit more and handed me a $100 bill and a grocery list. And without thinking, I took it and walked in the store and bought the groceries and walked in out and gave it to her. And I wasn't even sure I was going to share the story. I told my boyfriend about it, and he said, "Oh, you absolutely have to." And I've just been so impressed by the response, because I wasn't expecting it, but also I think this is such a trying time for so many people, particularly elderly folks. So I was glad it can help, and I was glad it can inspire tons of other people to do the same.
What do you want people to take away from this? What do you want them to think about what they can do, Rebecca?
Yeah, look out for your neighbors. Look out for the other folks in your community. It's a difficult time. People are really scared. There's a lot of nerves. I see it in schools and grocery stores and other places around the community that I live in. But kindness helps. And be kind to your neighbor. And if someone is having a hard time or someone can't get basic essentials, reach out to them. You never know the kind of impact you're able to have.
And I just thought that was such a beautiful story. And we could use the distributing organizing model of the Sanders campaign to replicate this in our own neighborhoods. Or if you live in a building, you could put it on the doors of all the apartments in your building. So let's talk a little bit about how we could do this.
Well, my very first political event was the 2000 Democratic National Convention. And I just went to go to the free concert that Rage Against the Machine was holding in the parking lot, right? And then there was a riot. And if you all remember the headlines, a riot at the DNC. But it was at that moment that in just the simplest facts that were gotten wrong from mainstream media and from the stories that we were seeing, it made me start looking for alternative news and information. So by the time that the 9/11 happened the following year and the Iraq war, or Afghanistan and then Iraq, I was already sort of prepped with a certain cynicism to the mainstream information. But I also, I thought I was informing myself, but didn't realize the responsibility that I had to reach out to my community. And where that leads to is at one point I had 5 cousins, a nephew, 2 family friends who had enlisted, all of them most under the age of 20, had enlisted to go fight in these wars. And I felt that I understood their impulse to, protect America, but I also knew that it was a war predicated on lies. So I started looking for answers, and that's where I found Dennis Kucinich's Department of Peace campaign. And so I read through the 14 pages of legislation that has often been criticized for having everything and the kitchen sink, because it talked about like animal rights and safety and security. It talked about the environment and like, what does that have to do with war and peace and all of these things. And I'm like, no, that's the vision. If we had, if we changed and organized our government structure to not only have a Department of War, but to have a Department of Peace, then we would have different conversations about crises and violence and all of that stuff. And when Bernie Sanders was asked in 2016 what he was the greatest threat to national security, people laughed when he said the environmental crisis. People like, oh, what, what is he smoking? People were really hostile and condescending to that idea. But back in 2001, in July of 2001, when the Department of Peace legislation was introduced, environment was huge because water is kind of a big deal. Natural resources, food, access to food is kind of a big deal when it comes to survival of like humans. And it goes back to desperate people do desperate things. So I had this huge, like grand global picture of, utopia. And then I started talking to folks and they're like, yeah, that sounds great. That should totally be what we should have, but having no clue how we could as a community make it happen. So then I was like, I can't share this grand utopian vision. So I would table, I got lists, I did email things, we just started doing calls, we started house meetings, but it wasn't enough. When I went to my congressional representatives and my senator, they're like, well, where are the people? that support this? Where are the students talking about peace? Where is this? And so it made me realize that we needed to community organize, but I didn't know what that meant. So I went online looking for something that could be more effective. And it was, some of you might know, I was an organizer with Acorn back in 2006, 2007, 2008, because they were a national organization whose organizer's job was to knock on every door and talk to every person in a community and say, hey, what's going on? How could we get together with your neighbors, come together and fix some of the biggest problems that you all are facing? And maybe together we could fix that pothole. And then if we get that pothole fixed, maybe then we can get the trees trimmed and some more lighting out here. And then if we can do that, maybe we could start to, and it just opened up people's idea about what was possible if we came together.
Mike, how do we go forward with this idea in an age where people are afraid to even go outside? How do you see the logistics?
Of course, I don't presume to have all the answers or to know what really should be done or have a guide for everybody else to follow. I'm discovering this as I go along, I think, as much as most of us are. However, the way I envision it is that, first I'm to make this preliminary contact. And now I've identified some people that seem to be, maybe more vulnerable or that have a greater need perhaps. And that I want to continue reaching out to them. I also ran into a couple who said, we're okay, but it's so cool that you're doing this, and can we come along tomorrow? So they're going to go walk with me again on the following day. So within the community, I think that this could grow and turn into something valuable. There are other organizations locally that are doing their own efforts, and they're leveraging the strength of community organizations and businesses even that want to be involved in making sure that everyone is secure. I think that there's a growing understanding of the fact that none of us are really safe from a virus by purchasing some equipment or by purchasing some privilege or by purchasing some favors from government, what have you. There is really nothing that we can do to save ourselves from a virus. Our biome is shared. So this means that basically these microbes are going to travel between all human beings sooner or later. It's going to happen. It's just a question of when. Yes, I think it's really sad that the government organizations that we rely on to be able to take quick action on these things sort of stumbled. They rolled the dice and decided what's going to play better for us politically perhaps, and decided to take it in different channels that blew the opportunity to really contain when that was still possible. Geographic containment is, I think, the best approach, but that ship has sailed. So now what we're looking at is that they're trying to do these, they're trying to step in and do them when they're actually too late. The virus is already here, it's spreading locally, and we have to do things that will mitigate the impact. I think one of the big things that we can do, of course, is to reach out to people so that they won't be afraid. The biggest enemy of all during an epidemic or pandemic is panic. People that are scared, and we see this with the toilet paper phenomenon, right? I went to the store on Tuesday, and it's like, I wasn't looking for toilet paper, but as I went by the aisle, I thought, wow, completely empty, all these shelves. And then yesterday, people were, kind of snapping up everything they could get. And I don't think that there really is a risk of the supply chain going dry at this point of the game. So it doesn't really make much sense, but it does reflect the fact that people are very scared, although they won't admit it. So if we can reach out to these people that are vulnerable, actually more vulnerable than the rest because of their age, because of the fact that they're isolated and nobody's looking after them, and who are scared maybe to go to the supermarket, I think this is the first step. After this, we need to start gathering information, sort of creating a database. Okay, I've given you my information. Send me a message or call me whenever you feel like. And then we need to gather their information so we can start calling them back proactively. And so that they will feel that somebody out there cares about them, that they're, we're not really strangers anymore, okay? Now we are part of the community, we're neighbors, we belong together, and we will take care of each other to get through this thing.
My son told me he went to the Ralphs and the whole thing was cleared out. He said he waited online yesterday for an hour, and he said he stocked up on all these provisions, canned goods and whatnot. And I haven't really been worried about food running out. So I go to the supermarket several times a week. I never stock up. But today I thought, maybe I should, do some stocking up just in case anything happens. And over there at Bristol Farms, there wasn't an hour-long line, but I did see that certain shelves were completely cleared out. The beans shelf, the pasta shelf, the cereal shelf, the disinfectant shelf, and certainly the toilet paper shelf. And my son, when he came into the car, he said, "Mom, they ran out of toilet paper, but I got you a box of tissues." I thought it was so sweet that he thought of me like that. So I said, "Okay, good. Well, we've got to go to the bank, and there's a restaurant we like right next to the bank." And for the first time, I was taking the tissue and putting it on the handle of the door. And when I handed her my credit card and she handed it back, I took it back with the tissue. And then I saw the wipes there, and I took a wipe and I wiped off my credit card. Then I took the wipe and wiped the table and the chair. And it's such a change for me between Monday and today. Monday, I went to a restaurant and I went to a freaking museum. I mean, there were so many people in that museum, I can't even tell you. But I did find out that like there was a man who got behind me and I said, "Excuse me, would you just move back a little bit? Because I know that it's the 6 feet. You're supposed to be away from somebody 6 feet. It's only if they cough." So that made me feel a little bit better, because somebody could have it and be standing next to you, but if they don't cough, it's not going to come at you.
I had the flu in January with a very dry cough that was pretty awful. Is you don't know when you're going to cough. So you just need to stay away from folks. Yeah. Like I had a coughing attack that, hit me for 5 minutes. And if anybody had been near me, they obviously were going to get whatever that I had at that time. So it is being mindful. It's changing that, but it's also like kind of joking and kind of being lighthearted about how scary it is. I saw a meme that said, somebody posted, "I'm going to invent toilet paper, made out of CBD so everyone can like calm their ass down." I just thought that's hilarious. We have to like be able to joke and get through this, but sitting around and being desperate and being scared and not knowing anything, not knowing the answers to questions is recipe for folks to just get in their head and really, really tie themselves up in knots and then head out to the grocery store and stock up and grab a gun and like be ready to like defend their homestead.
Yeah,
we that is not what we need to do. And Bernie made that call. Now is not the time to think that we just got to take care of ours. We got to take care of each other and mutual aid. And this is actually what government is about. Government is about people deciding to come together and say, okay, what do we need? Okay, well, we need streets. Okay, so as a group, we're gonna hire a bunch of folks to make streets and keep streets clean. And you know what? I don't have time to do that. So let's get somebody who can watch over that. That is government at a very small level, but that's what we've decided how we organize. And so now it's a matter of taking back our democracy to work for us and for the people, to serve people.
Too bad that they don't teach civics in school anymore. Because people really don't understand even the very basic levels of their government. Mm-hmm. I was covering the March for Our Lives rally that was in downtown LA, and I was interviewing some very active high school students from Fairfax High. And this young woman said the word Senate. And I was like, "Do you mean Senate?" And it was so obvious to me that she had never heard the word said, either in her home or in a classroom, to even know that it was pronounced Senate. Because I said, "Do you know who your representatives are?" Unless you take AP government in high school, and not everybody takes this AP course, you're not going to learn. And I've been, since my kids are out of school now, but the whole time they were in school, I was always nagging the directors of the school to try to do this program that the Center for Civic Education in Calabasas, California has, and it's called Project Citizen. And it's basically a hands-on, project-based learning where the kids, and they have this aligned with the state standards. So either middle school, high school, or even college. This program, Project Citizen, the kids decide a problem in their community. Like, let's say there's a stop sign and people aren't stopping, and kids are getting hit, or bicyclists are getting hit. So say they want to have, a traffic light there. So they have to learn, they have to democratically in their classroom decide the problem, democratically decide the solution, and then figure out which agency they need to present to in order to make that happen. They need to learn how to get constituents behind them so they can come with support. You know, it's the whole basic process, because right now people think that all they need to do in a democracy is vote. And we know not everybody even does that. So we need to teach this. It's vitally important.
That is why I shared the Acorn story, because that is what we ended up doing when we went door to door, was kind of doing the civics engagement, kind of doing those civic lessons. And that's what needs to happen now. And if we have to do it, you know, with a flyer and then a phone call, or, you know, the conference call. I love that idea. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, let's have our street, you know, come together. What do we need? But that's how you teach folks what to do, the stuff that they didn't learn. And I know I took AP government, but when I had to, when I first learned about the Department of Peace, and then I understood how you do a cabinet thing, how to position, I was kind of pissed about how much I didn't know. I didn't know 435 congressional representatives. I didn't know 100 senators, 280. I didn't know 6-year terms and 4-year terms. I didn't know the details, the nitty gritty. I didn't know the president's cabinet, the executive branch separate from the legislative branch, separate from the judicial branch. I knew it in theory, but like, what does it really mean? I didn't know. And I was kind of irritated. And I had a specific lesson one-on-one with a young girl who helped on a campaign here in my local city. And we were talking about how government works. And she was pointing out that her textbook was really old and outdated, was, you know, graffiti ridden. She was a student at a continuation high school. So it was an under-resourced school for under-resourced students who are barely making it through our school system. And so I said, well, what would you do if you wanted a new book, or if you wanted to know that this was an up-to-date book? Do you think that the kids in say Beverly Hills have that book? And she's like, well, no. Okay, so who would you go to? How would we get, who pays for that book? And she's like, well, I don't know. So we started talking about a school board. We went through the process. So she said, I could, I'm not the only one who complains about this, because sometimes we get assigned stuff and the page that we get assigned is like torn out of our book. She goes, so like, this is a problem. And I said, then this is how you fix it.
The fact that we have segregated like electoral politics from actual politics. Politics is a space between people. It has to do with everything that has to do with human interaction. And the fact that we've isolated it into this corner and delivered it to specialists and washed our hands of it, and now we get to point our fingers at them and say, you're not doing a good enough job, it completely misses the point. And I think that young people do need to learn not only from better textbooks, which are obviously necessary, and better education, but also from experience. We should be involved. We should be setting an example for them. And I think this is one opportunity for us to start that. I mean, yes, we'll start by knocking on their doors and we'll gather some information. We'll start getting a database of the names of people, and this will be an opportunity for us to springboard into other kinds of activism. I mean, there's very good efforts that are being done by government officials, like HR 6201, which was passed last, I think, midnight, which addresses a lot of important things, and it's necessary. However, it does not deal with the immediate needs of local communities. We have to take care of these things ourselves. So it's not just like specialists that we call ourselves as community organizers. I don't see myself as a community organizer. I'm a guy that drives away to his job early in the morning, drives back in the evening. I park my car, I go in and try to spend some time with my family. I occasionally see some of my neighbors. Well, we need to go beyond that. We need to do something more, because if we don't organize together these gaps in what governments, even the best intentioned people in our government, they're leaving these things behind. There's nothing in HR 6201 that I can see that will address the problem of squalor. There's people living in misery, living in their cars, living on the street. These are multipliers, accelerators. I mean, just the fact that we're going to practice social distancing among ourselves is not going to be enough. We have to deal with this multiplication of contagion that happens in these parts of our community.
Yes.
And a multiplication of the problems that already exist, right? The injustice,
That's
the
right.
systemic injustices that already exist, the economic disparities, all access to everything.
Mike Bonin, who is the only city council member in LA to have endorsed Bernie, just went around because he wanted to do a resolution and it just took too long. So in his own district, he went around and he put 44 hand sanitizing stations near the homeless encampments. And they also need to have bathrooms there. I mean, some of this stuff that they've needed for a long time, that it seems like it's so impossible to get, now is almost crucial that they get it. Somebody was recruiting the other day for the Strokes concert. The Strokes is a band that has endorsed Bernie, and they were going to have a concert here in LA.
Yep.
And somebody in our movement was looking for volunteers to work the concert. And this one young kid I know at Loyola Marymount, and he says, I'm in. And so I private messaged him. I'm like, you shouldn't do this. It's going to be a danger to you. And he goes, oh, I'm young. I can take the risk. And I had to tell him, you may not come down with this, but you could be a carrier for it. And then you could be around your parents or your grandparents and pass it on to them. So it's kind of this individualistic ethos that we have in this country, that the Bernie Sanders, slogan, not me,
us,
is designed to counter. But I want to pivot to a different subject now, which is how this might help the Bernie Sanders campaign going forward. Because as I said, we do have all these Bernie organizers. You were actually one of the super volunteers, Bobbi, who was fortunate enough to get hired by the campaign. We hired a lot here in California. And so you brought extra skills to your job. You weren't just like taking orders from your area director. You were using your own ideas for the best practices. And I was trying to get the campaign 4 years ago to employ the Marshall Gans model of distributed organizing, which the Obama campaign used so successfully in 2008, which was having precinct captains and neighborhood captains, where the person would be the surrogate for Obama. And they taught them public narrative, the story of self, the story of us, the story of now. So if everybody remembers, Obama's speech to the 2004 Democratic Convention is what catapulted him to the presidency in a mere 4 years, because he was talking about his, Kenyan father and his grandfather who was in World War II. And he took his story and then he related it to the story of the people listening. And then why do we have to do this now? What is the urgency of now? And Bernie Sanders is really uncomfortable telling his story. Yes. But what he was able to do this time was have his town halls and have the people tell their stories.
And he did try. He really did try to be more forthcoming with his own personal narrative, much more than anything that he did before in 2015 and 16 when he first was running. There is even a podcast on YouTube, on Bernie's YouTube channel. The first one was a sit-down interview directly with Bernie to sort of talk about his personal story and what brought him to the way that he thinks and how he organizes and why he feels the way that he does about these issues and injustices. Moving forward, how this helps the campaign, again, we're not doing door-to-door canvassing here in California anymore. Our primary is over, but there are other states that still have yet to vote. Bernie's fireside chat today he talked about like a couple of the states have already postponed their primary elections. Louisiana, Georgia, Puerto Rico, I think are the three, but there's still Arizona, Tuesday, and maybe one more, Missouri, is it? Maybe Missouri, on Tuesday. And so what do we got to do? Well, to support the campaign, volunteers can hop on the Bernie dialer and talk to voters there and reassure them that, what they have to do to take precautions, that it's only if somebody's sick that, if they cough on you, you're going to be okay. You just be really mindful of what you're touching and how you're, and how you're interacting with folks, but go vote. Like it's that necessary. And if we're going to have to learn what do they offer in Arizona, what kind of voting. I did see an announcement that Arizona was actually closing down polling locations and opening up vote centers so that they could vote anywhere. But that also
comes up with long lines.
Right. So, so then maybe there's a call to, well, if you're going to do that, then you're going to suppress the vote because people are going to be scared. So maybe we do postpone until you can get a vote by mail ballot, or you can adjust, because we can make adjustments. And the sooner and better that we do that, and the campaign makes those kinds of calls, the better that we can engage voters to understand that the press conference and the economic plan that Bernie talked about, and to address the specific medical things, he said, obviously this administration is not doing it. They are woefully failed. And so what we need is a bipartisan congressional commission. We need the legislature to take this over, but we don't need politicians making these decisions. We need medical experts.
What if the volunteer calls and says, this is Lauren Steiner from the Bernie Sanders campaign. I just want to make sure you're all right. Do you need anything with this virus? I don't know if there's a run, we're obviously trying to get out the vote for Bernie. We want you to know what steps to take at the polling place. If you can vote by mail, it's not too late to vote by mail, vote by mail. But in the meanwhile, we're starting the, I don't know what you want to call it, Bernie Sanders Brigade is a name that Carlos Marroquin had for his group. Now they have the Bernie Sanders Metro Squad. And the Metro Squad actually had a big organizing meeting a few weeks ago. Like, how do we go forward with the people that we've brought together to advance Bernie's issues on the state and local level? And as you both know, since we were delegates in 2016, a lot of us stayed together and got involved in issue fights, whether it was the statewide bill to repeal Costa-Hawkins,
SB 562,
single payer,
Medicare for all.
We all stayed involved because I think what brought us to the Sanders campaign in the first place was that we were activists on the issues, and we saw that he had the right take on all of our issues. Yeah. So it was obvious that after that campaign ended, we were going to still continue to work. And then a lot of us got back into the new campaign, and a lot of us stayed fighting for the issues. I started a show, and I try to give everybody a voice, all the activists, all the candidates, all the issues.
Right.
Thanks for doing that, Lauren. I think that's something that's really great that's come out of this. And we all appreciate it, I know. I think that we do need to look for, how we can springboard this. This does create a golden opportunity, but I think that we might do best to sort of take a step back and wonder, what else there is that we haven't been doing so far, not just how we can continue the efforts before. And I think that really bringing it home, Bernie is completely irrefutable on every one of the issues. His position is carefully crafted and honed, and there's just it's unassailable. There's no way to attack it with logic and reason. So they're attacking him on personality and all these other things. Because of that, we have this opportunity here in front of us to show that we're not only about the argumentative approach, that we're not just about convincing you that we are more right than you are, that we have the logic on our side. We also have the heart on our side. We're for real. We really mean what we say. When Bernie says that he's here to take care of every American, we're here to come to your door and to show you that this is what we say, and we mean it.
I mean, we can all do this, even in the states, like we three are in California, even in the states that have already voted, we can continue on with this,
Right.
And not just for the selfless reasons that we're doing it, but I'm also thinking how it could benefit somebody who's in another state that hasn't voted. If they say those Bernie people just came to my door, Mom, and they wanted to know if there was anything I needed. They're really serious. They really care about us.
Maybe we should wear shirts that say Bernie Bro, on them. So
I was totally thinking that. I was totally thinking like a Bernie Bro knocked on my door, right? I was
thinking it could be like Berners Occupy COVID-19 or something. I keep thinking of Occupy Sandy because it was just such a successful effort,
Right. Well, and maybe it's just, an Occupy Sanders campaign. We're occupying the presidential campaign in the way that we know how, and just being the ambassadors that Bernie needs out in the community, but also ambassadors for the sort of policies that he's bringing forward, right? We can show folks that in action. If we can show folks that in action, then just like Mike says, the logic it's not an argument anymore. It's just, this is what works.
Francis Monawala said that we should be chalking on the sidewalk after the rain stops, of course. It's raining here in LA. And it made me think of Christopher Helen, who's going around the country, you know, chalk for Bernie, doing his Bernie art. And yeah, we did chalking during Occupy also. And she was saying, just chalk on the sidewalk. Here's a number to call if you need help, and just do that. I mean, we could localize that chalking.
Right. Even just the simple questions that I see coming up on my Facebook feed is like, oh my God, they closed the stores. What am I, or they closed the schools. What am I going to do? What about people who have to work? Blah, blah, blah. Well, I saw Governor Newsom posted, right? I saw the post on Thursday that he had waived the 7-day waiting period to actually collect on unemployment or disability benefits. And then just yesterday, or just this morning, I saw that they had updated to include, without having to tap into FMLA, actual unemployment for parents who have no other childcare, options. And so, but if folks don't know that, like if they don't know to connect to the governor's, page, then they miss that, right? They don't know that. And they're walking around scared and stressed. And that also weakens them to be more susceptible to picking up not only this virus, but anything else. And we're still in the middle of the flu season, right? Sometimes just talking to somebody on the phone because they're lonely. And that's what Bertie talked about, being isolated, right? So I was telling my mom, who lives alone, and I was talking with her. She goes, you're right. Because I was telling her my idea of like, let's do some phone banks. And we know how to reach out to talk to folks on the phone. Even the hostile voters who are like, stop calling me. We know how to kind of break through those conversations and barriers. And she goes, you know what? Because she doesn't want me to get overwhelmed and stuff, because I can do that. She said, but you're right. I remember one time I accidentally called the wrong number. And this woman answered, she asked me what my name was. And I said, Lucy. And she just started talking to me. And she goes, I was on the phone with her for 45 minutes because she was worried about her family. Yeah. And did I have any ideas? Did I know, what she could do? And she goes, and it was a wrong number, and she goes, and I needed to call, your Aunt Terry. But like, it is not wrong that our society and our individual attitude and our individualist, rugged American do-all attitude has alienated the humanity in all of us.
Yeah.
And we've got to return to that. And Bernie's campaign has that heart to do it. But all of the folks who are moved by his message understood and understand that that's what it's always been about.
I was in Mexico in 2009 when the swine flu outbreak happened. And I was actually one of the first patients. I was out in the Sierra in Northern Hidalgo and San Luis Potosí when this thing broke out. And I got really sick. And then I got to be, I self-isolated, kind of having some basic knowledge of epidemiology. And I tried to figure out what was going on. It wasn't until I was recovering that the media started talking about these things. And then after that is when it got really scary. But I wanted to share a couple of quotes that I pulled out of Albert Camus' The Plague, which is a really good novel about a situation that's kind of similar in some ways to what we're going through here. And what he says is, all I maintain is that on this earth, there are pestilences and there are victims. And it's up to us, so far as possible, not to join the forces with the pestilences. And then later in the book, he says, and indeed, it could be said that once the faintest stirring of hope became possible, the dominion of plague was ended. If we are already in a situation we're susceptible and we see this wave coming and we don't really know how hard it's going to hit us, how bad it's going to be, these are unknowns. A lot of people are spending a lot of effort trying to prognosticate and to forecast and to foretell which way it's going to play out. We really don't know. We don't have a population that's been broadly tested, people that are asymptomatic and that have been exposed. We don't know what those numbers are. And a lot of this is being extrapolated and guessed at. I think that we have to prepare for a really bad situation, but humanity has made it through all of these terrible things that have happened, cataclysmic plagues that have happened throughout history. We can do this again if we pull together. When we're distrustful of each other, if we allow this to isolate us further and to draw away from each other, that's where we lose. And I think this is kind of the flag that we need to wave.
As I mentioned, Jack Rabbit Pollock, who I know from Occupy Wall Street, is going to be having a call with the Inter-Occupy folks about doing a maestro call, and we can get thousands on that call to talk about how we can roll this out nationwide. If you're interested in being on this call, just put in the comments. I want to thank you both for being who you are, great Berners and great humanitarians. And we're going to get through this thing together.
We are going to get through this thing together. And I know that there's a lot of folks out there who, because we've all been conditioned to like put on a happy face and be these tough folks that are really scared, not only for themselves, but for the people that they care about. And there is nothing more paralyzing than fear. So being able to move in action out of love for all that we love is empowering. I'm going to go out until I can't and help folks where I can, give them the information and resources, and we can all do those very simple things without harming ourselves, without giving money that we don't have, without giving resources that we don't have, but tapping into what we've already decided as a community about working together.
Thank you so much.
This is our movement, folks. Let's be who we are.
It is.
All right. Good night.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks,
Love
Lauren.
you guys.
Love you too, Mike. Love you, Lauren.